Welcome to Brightly, You Radiant Being, the show that wildly recognizes, encourages, and invests in the radiance we all carry so you can shine your brightest. Each episode, we share soul-driven advice and topics to help you live more brightly in mind, body, and spirit. Through sharing our experiences, friendship, and passions, we hope to impact you to step more brightly into yourself, inch by inch.
Tracy.
Amy, hey, real quick, show me on the feelings wheel. What emotion are you this week?
Oh, where's my feelings wheel? I think I feel like I'm a couple different things. I feel courageous.
Ooh.
And I feel inspired. And I'm still a little angry.
That makes sense because we were pretty angry in the last episode. Yeah. If you haven't listened, please do. We're still talk like this, like we weren't yelling at each other. But
yeah, we're not angry with each other. How about you? Where are you on the feelings wheel?
Oh, good question. So the feelings wheel that I'm looking at is actually from feelingswheel.com. There's a few different ones. There's a lot of ways to view feelings. When I looked at the inner circle of like the big words people tend to use, I was like, oh, I'm not any of these. This is going to be interesting. How am I going to find a feeling today? So those are surprised, happy, sad, disgusted, angry, fearful, and bad.
Yeah.
And so then I started going on the inner ones and I was like, well, some of these apply, but they're not really an emotion. It's more just kind of a state of being I'm in right now. And then I went to the outer edge and I was like, oh, I got like 5 of 9 bad going on right now, but I feel okay. So
see, though, that goes back to that thing that I feel like we touched on, that you can be angry and another thing. You can hold 2 things at one time.
So I don't like the word bad.
Right.
I'm trying to find, because there's just so much morality, because there isn't the opposite on here. There isn't good. And it's a much smaller triangle and list of emotions than the others. But
and you know what else I noticed about the feelings wheel is that it feels as if there's the heavier emotions, the slower, the weightier emotions outweigh the swifter, lighter emotion.
Yeah. Well,
I don't want to say the bad outweighs the good.
I mean, we could probably make another inner circle of just like 3, kind of like primary color it and see if they overlap and work together. But on this one, when I look at bad, I'd say, you listed a couple. So I had indifferent.
Sure.
Apathetic. Somehow also overwhelmed. Sleepy and unfocused.
Yeah, actually that makes sense because I feel like the indifferent, apathetic, out of focus, and sleepy can all be because you're overwhelmed or burned out.
Did you get your master's in counseling psychology in the past week? What just happened here?
I don't know.
I mean, that wasn't where I was going to take the show, but damn, I have some stuff to reflect on later. I mean, we did have an episode on burnout a while back. I'll go back and listen. Yeah. Well, okay. So for someone hosting a personal development podcast, I don't sound very personally developed as of late, and I am aware of that.
It's a practice, right?
Right. It's a practice. It's a state of being, and I'm just not visiting that state right now. I mean, I feel like part of it, I haven't really felt connected to my goals. My routine, my goals, larger purpose in life kind of a thing. And so because of, or as a result, or maybe I'm not feeling connected because of this, but like, I'm just kind of wishy-washy and unaccountable to them as well. Right. So whether that caused the disconnection or the disconnection caused the wishy-washiness, I don't know. But I have an accountability partner that I work with, even outside of you. But I've noticed when we chit chat either on the show or off air, and then when I bring some of my failings up to my accountability partner in an effort to be accountable, you guys hold a mirror up to me and show me all the things I am doing. Like, how dare you? And then every time that happens, I'm kind of re-inspired and reconnected and take a different view of both myself and my goals. And so just after my last session with him, when that came up, thanks, Mark. I was like, is it just how I view myself and how I view my goals that needs a refresh? Or is it the goals itself? Or is it me, myself, right? I think it's how I'm looking at it, not necessarily
what it is.
Yes. So Dreyer, he's very quotable in a lot of things, but one of the quotes that I like of his is, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
I love that. I love that. And I think that that's one of those quotes that every time I read it, every time I see it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Because it seems that it's not one that is integrated for whatever reason, that I have to keep being reminded of it. And I think I can hold on to it for a while, but it almost feels like life or whatever, I let that get in the way, and then I start feeling stuck again.
Well, so I'm a proponent, when it fits the situation, when it's the right tool, for cognitive behavioral therapy tools and ideas. So that's a very similar idea of, if you can't change something, change the way you think about it.
Yeah. Okay.
But I've come to not like that, because how my twisted, informed mind has started to skew it is just to reinforce my perspective of I am the problem. So I can keep changing things, but it still continues to put pressure on me to do it differently, or why aren't you doing the thing, right? My emotional state might change here or there, but I'm not really looking at it differently. I'm just kind of forcing it. So I like how he kind of changes when you change the way you look at things.
Oh, so it's not like you have to change or it has to change. You're just the way you look at it.
Yeah.
The lens through which you're looking at it. I don't even know that I ever actually pulled that statement apart before, because now it means something just a little bit different to me as well.
What's it bringing up for you then?
Well, I feel like for me, anytime I heard that statement, it was a little bit more pressure on me as well. Like, oh, I have to be the one to change. Like, I have to be the one to do something, but I don't. It's just what I hold up to view something. But how do you do that? What do you do? How do you do that?
Do you do that? Well, so what lens are you viewing your life from? And are you intentional about it? So we all have kind of a personal perspective, right? Like when let's say a cop comes up after an event and they separate everybody. Let's say you and I witness something, and they're going to put us each in a room and ask us what happened. And there's that old adage of, there's going to be my way, your way, and the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we're all filtering things a little bit differently. We're noticing different things. Things have different meaning, right? Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to how you look at yourself, how you look at those in your life or those around you and the world, you are actually in control of that perspective. And I think so many of us just kind of default and don't realize what's been influencing it, what's been clouding it.
Yeah. And we don't, it's almost as if we give the power away to something else, instead of looking at it and seeing, am I looking at this through the lens of how I don't know, like what my mother would have looked at, how my mother would have looked at it, or how my mother would expect me to look at it.
I love that you're already recognizing that it could be influence, because my first thought, was just, this is the truth. Why would I, not for me, but that a lot of people, when it comes to perspective, is, what do you mean? Why would I look at it any differently? This is the right way. This is the only way. Right. There is no other way.
Yeah, but our perspective is informed by the people we grew up with, how we were raised, who's in our life right now, who we spend the most amount of time. Yes.
And it's so full of bias, right? Especially if you don't have any sort of diversity in your life. I went to a graduate level program and was specifically taught to look for blind spots in myself and other people, to be aware of my bias as much as possible and constantly be doing that. But as soon as you leave that school environment and go to smaller environments, that's really hard to keep challenging yourself because you're being shown less perspectives in the first place. And so, you said, how do you start? And I think you kind of have to start with just analyzing where you're at, and lay the groundwork from there. So perspective is a particular attitude toward a way of regarding something, or it's commonly known as also like a point of view. And so, as you said, are you learning it or have you chosen it? Another thing to kind of like think about is, kind of like I was saying, you may be aware of it and you may have at one point crafted it or honed it or thought it was really good or well influenced, but have you been intentionally maturing it over time?
And I don't know. Like, how would you know?
Well, so that's just it. So if you're
with me,
if you're not being intentional with this, if you haven't thought about it, if you haven't, it's a huge self-reflection piece, right? Like it's a big pause in life of like, how am I looking at things or in my own inner circle and then expanding outward to larger circles. Mm-hmm. But in my work, we have these things called maturity models, where there are these different levels or steps of maturity. And each one has kind of like a list of requirements so that you can kind of check off and see where you're at. So you could be really mature in your worldview perspective that you take, and try and be really cultured and aware of your bias and really informing yourself. Yet the perspective you're looking at your son or daughter who you're really annoyed with right now, or your mom or dad, or your spouse, or your boss, that could be a little less mature.
Right. It could. And I feel like the things that we look at also, depending on the relation. Yes, the things that they look at us. Exactly. No, that's so funny. Depending on a relationship with it, whether it's a thing out in the world, or it is, like you just said, your son, your daughter, a partner, a friend, what's the relationship and what's the expectation of your perspective on them? Do they expect you to perceive them as a certain way? And so then that even puts more layers on it.
Well, and I think, some people with absolutely no self-awareness, all of the layers that I just mentioned, or the circle going from in to out, might not be very mature at all. But I think if you are self-aware, you're much more likely to tackle your outward perspectives and the ones you might be sharing publicly or those that might affect others more than you might analyze and look at your perspective of yourself.
Yes.
I mean, and we're who we spend the most time with, as we bring up regularly.
I feel like that is, you brought up the word overwhelm earlier, and that does almost overwhelm me, as thinking of looking at how I perceive myself.
Why is it so overwhelming?
I don't know.
That's okay. You don't have to know.
Yeah. I feel like part of it is that I assume I'm perceiving myself in a certain way, but I think if I dig deeper, I'm perceiving myself in a not so great way.
And that's where I feel like I land as well. When I think of like the outer world circle, I think of how you responded to the events that happened locally and that spurred national change in 2020 with the civil unrest and the murder of George Floyd. And I was really inspired to I felt I had an educated perspective, but I was really overwhelmed by personal things, a global pandemic, work things, all this other stuff. And feeling like, the work that I already do in DEI, that's informing me. I'm informed. There's always room to learn and do better. But I feel okay. And then I started talking to you more and seeing just how far you took it and the conversations you and your husband were having and you and your kids were having and the books you were consuming. And I was like, you know what? I could do more. I should do more. And so that was inspiring because I was able to see other people's perspectives and be like, you know what? I do need to take accountability and take the time to broaden myself on this because these things are just going to still keep happening. And I do have more of a role than I think I do. Right. And so you help me see that perspective that I could have more change, even if the change is just in me, even if the change is just in who I have one conversation with or share a book with or a news article or something. That helped change my perspective on where I felt I landed in current events and the impact I could have.
So what I love about that is that you didn't close yourself off, because you could have, and I think many people did. They were like, I'm fine. I've done what needs to be done and I'm fine. And I don't need to perceive these things out here. But you didn't. You left yourself open to perceive other things, and then having the acceptance of saying, oh, I see this, and I think I want to incorporate that into what I'm doing.
I think what helped allowed me do that was a good, strong sense of self. And that as I learned new perspectives about the outer world, the people around me, and then in tune myself, I didn't internalize them. I was able to take accountability for what I was learning, and try and make changes and just accept where I had been and where I want to go. And I think a lot of people, when they start on the outside in, they just feel so blamed that they can't, blamed, powerless, at fault. They can't see it. And so they put up those walls as protection. So some people have to start from the inside and work their way out. And some people, if they've already done that work, or, maybe their resiliency is just at a different level, can go from the outside in. So it's really interesting that you're feeling overwhelmed and a little guarded of the inside stuff, but you're able to do some of this outer work really well.
Yeah, I feel I'm having a moment right now of like, Amy, do you need to go back into therapy? I just don't. And, maybe I do. I mean, obviously we are proponents of,
and it doesn't hurt. I mean, in the moment, it doesn't feel the best.
Well, right. It actually can hurt a little bit. It's very odd. I didn't know that this was going to come up for me. And so it's an odd thing. I feel like, I always feel like I have more inner work to do. And honestly, I think that we are never done with our inner work. It's like I said, it's just kind of freaked me out a little bit how I was like, oh, I'm feeling these feelings about this. So I'm not sure.
Again, this is about, changing the lens on how you look at something. Yes. So if you take you as an example of the thing you want to change the lens for, you can start by kind of analyzing and documenting, finding some words for what you're currently seeing, and then look at that and analyze for what's the lens I'm seeing this through. Is it criticism? Is it support? Is it maybe that blind treat yourself manner that's not really treating yourself, right? Like, is it compassion? Is it helping, or is it hurting? Like how you're viewing a belief, a thought, an action, anything like that.
Yeah, I think even just listening to you, and I feel like my perception of myself is disappointment. And that I should be. It's that should that we've talked about before. Get rid of the shoulds. But sometimes they still come up, right? And that I feel like the past me thought that present me would be way further along in her self-development, side gigs, whatever, writing, all of that. And so I think that because I'm looking at myself with this lens of disappointment, and then I get overwhelmed with that, I wonder if I change that lens to more of a compassion, or the fact that I have high empathy is to look at myself with empathy as well. Can you look at yourself with empathy?
Sure.
I don't know. So I do know I have to change that lens. And I'm wondering why would I have all those expectations?
Oh, you want to get to the root cause because you want to correct it. I mean, maybe that's why you feel so overwhelmed. I think you can change your perspective without correcting a prior lens, because that lens is serving something in you. right? It's whether it's a boundary or a motivator, or, there's so many reasons it exists. And a lot of the time it's a learned behavior. And so you have to learn new ones. And so you can't just ditch the old one or you'll starve, right? Like you don't want to start from scratch. Maybe there's some stuff in there you can kind of pillage and steal and borrow. But you named a lot of, like, when looking at what's going on and why maybe you're hesitant to view yourself in a different way or to change the perspective, or why you're holding on to your perspective as truth, is look at the emotions that come up when you kind of step out and look at it. Notice any obligations you have, again, that it's supporting. Think of the outcomes that you're trying to achieve and how that lens is helping or hurting you get to that outcome or that achieve that goal. You mentioned it, expectations. Do others have expectations of me, or do I have expectations of myself or others?
No, I made up all these expectations. I feel like they're made up, and I created them from people who are not even alive anymore.
And is that why you're holding on to them? So are there attachments? Ooh, I didn't even have attachments in here. So if you're not watching on YouTube, Amy's having a moment. So thank you for being so vulnerable and raw in this.
Well, I didn't know. I didn't know that all these emotions and feelings, and I do have attachments. And I think it is attachment to my dad and my mom. And because they always viewed me, or the story I tell myself is that they viewed me through a lens of, like, you can do anything you want. You're this and you're that. And look at how good you are at this. And, like, my dad always wanted me to be like a journalist, a news anchor, but, a journalist on TV, like a Diane Sawyer. That's
Barbara Walters.
Not Barbara. No, he liked Diane Sawyer. He was like Diane Sawyer all the way. And I'm like, I don't know that that's what I want to do, but okay. And then, my mom, and so I feel like maybe there are attachments to their
They had a lens of ambition for you.
They did have a lens of ambition for me. Oh my gosh, Tracy.
And there's nothing wrong with having a lens or a perspective, having ambition as a value you hold, and that's how you're looking at yourself and others. But you have to have different lenses. So whether it's a viewfinder or like those transition lenses, when you go in and outside, they change. Like you have to be able to pull from different perspectives, I think, is where I'm getting from. So I don't think the ambition one is wrong, but if it's 100%, as it seems like it kind of stands you up to feel like a failure when you don't achieve certain things.
Yeah. Yes.
And how does holding on to a perspective that doesn't suit you and support you, how is that helping or hurting you? How does that show up?
Well, the stupid thing is that, I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but now that I can see it, that yes, I am viewing that through their lens of ambition for me and my story I'm telling myself of disappointing them. But actually how it's hurting me is it actually stops me from achieving the things that I could be achieving. Because I don't know if it stops me because I don't think if I went for the whatever, that I would do it to the expectation that was set for me, or what. But I do feel like it is holding me back.
A little perfectionism.
Oh.
And then I'm also hearing or reminded of that Ben Bergeron quote, where happiness doesn't lie on the other side of achievement. And maybe in your case, if you do achieve these great big things, that means you're going to have to work even harder and bigger, because everything else after that has to be equally as big or better, right? Like it never ends when you have only the ambition perspective of yourself and whether or not you're meeting that. That sounds exhausting.
Okay, I'm going to add that to my feelings.
Exhausted. For me, I feel like some of the perspectives or lenses that I developed in life were because the people around me didn't have them, and that what they had did not resonate with my internal value system, or made me feel uncomfortable, right? Like I was able to notice some of the stuff that you're feeling right now from the people around me and be like, I don't want that. But now here I am almost 40 years later, and those perspectives aren't necessarily wrong or bad, right? They just didn't have to be all consuming, which it felt like at the time they were. And so for me, like I've put up boundaries to certain perspectives and have a hard time.
So you put up boundaries to other people's perspective of you, or your own perspectives, or what could have been your own perspectives?
Other people's perspectives of me, but adopting their type of lens for how I look at things.
Okay.
And then I'm very influenced by the people I admire, people smart. Like I'm always kind of like you were saying, I'm trying to look for perspectives and try on things. But I think where my biggest stressor with it is right now is analysis paralysis of how much more do I have to learn? How much more ongoing is this? How do I know if I'm doing it right? Like when you just go from adopting from the people around you, from the media, things like that, you haven't necessarily done the development work to get to that, right? Like if you're able to, easily identify, or if they're just very clear about how they do it, or what's going on. And especially when it comes to like civil rights issues, right? People are pretty specific about what lenses and perspectives, and it's pretty easy to see which ones align with the world you want to be a part of, right? But if you haven't done the work behind it, that's going to be exhausting and feel really lonely alone, right? Or feel like you're a fraud, right? What's that saying? That-
oh, right. For heaven's sake. Imposter syndrome.
Yes, imposter syndrome. Thank you to everybody that screamed it virtually and telepathically to Amy in the future or in the past. But so for me, a lot of it right now, when it comes to identifying my own, there's this quote. I don't know how true this is psychologically, or like I read it on Tumblr like 10 or 15 years ago, or Pinterest, and it really resonated. But it's like, let's say you have a thought, and typically like a judgmental negative thought about yourself or someone else, and you correct it in your head. That means the first one wasn't your thought to begin with. It was a parent, it was a grandparent, it was a teacher, it was a friend, it was somebody of power, influence around you. Wow. And I used to get really hard on myself for that first thought, because I was like, you know better and you don't believe that. And like, what a terrible person are you to have it? And now I'm more like, hey, good job. You caught that and you made it better. And now I don't notice that I'm not having that first thought anymore, right? And so I still need to give myself credit that I have matured, I have grown, because I don't have to have those, oh, hey, good job moments anymore, because I'm already living my truth, right? Like I've already matured that perspective. Yeah. And so I think that's one way too, like that whole kind of CBT version of stop thought. Like if you catch yourself having a negative perspective about something and it doesn't feel good, or you're like, I don't really believe in that, where did that come from? Just be like, good job, you caught it. Like you don't always have to have something to replace it with.
And I don't want people to think that like I go through my day with this perspective of myself of disappointment. I don't. Typically, I'm like, tra la la, whatever. Here's the day. Here's what needs to be done, and I find enjoyment and I'm happy and all those good things, and anger as well. It's just that this brought it up. And obviously, if it brought it up like this, it needs to be looked at. But I will say one thing that I do, if I catch myself, if like I'm, viewing myself in a certain way, if let's say I've done something and it's like, oh, I immediately say to myself, I don't know why I started saying this. Tricks are for kids. I just started saying that. Tricks are for kids, rabbit. And so then I'm just like, yep, everything's cool. Like, don't get upset about it. That bad statement is not for you.
Well, and so there's a couple ways to like change it, right? Yeah. So I love how you're like, that bad statement's not for you. So one of the, like when thinking about like, how do I get out of analysis paralysis? How do I get out of thinking about this too much, making it too much of a process and not just like an action, is you can start by like, what would this look like from a different perspective? So you from 10 years ago, you as a teenager, you as a kid, how would they talk to you? How would a lover, a friend, a colleague, a peer, a mentee, a stranger have this perspective of you. So like I said, like I was talking to my accountability partner about how I'm not achieving anything and I'm a terrible accountability partner and I haven't done XYZ. And he listed off like 15 things I had done in a week. And I was like, well, yeah, but those weren't big things. And they're like, but they lead up to the big, like your daily habits matter, right? Like stop looking for the big thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. So every week I don't have to come in here with like a big story. Okay, cool. Thanks.
I can remember one time complaining. I was talking to a mutual acquaintance, Kelly, and I was saying, and then, after dinner, instead of working on my book, I'm just usually exhausted and I just sit and watch TV. And then I just like, that's just all that happens. And she's like, that is okay. Like that's normal to not want to start working on something after dinner. Like you've worked all day. And
you took some time for rest and relaxation. How human of you.
Yeah. But we need that outside person.
So when it comes to outside perspectives, though, remember, be a filter, not a sponge. Mm-hmm. So, when it comes,
I was too much of a sponge. Like,
so when it comes to like, I need a new perspective of myself, I go to people, not necessarily asking for advice, but asking for a reflection. So what do you think about when or just asking them to be a mirror for me when I'm saying bad things, like either repeat them back and be like, is this true? Right. Like, or just what your friend did, just what my accountability partner did. You're going to hear how they're viewing you. Like how, when I talk about this and this, how do you view me? Right. Or kind of, if you're just feeling down, do that thing where like that I do, where I just text a friend. I was like, I need a warm fuzzy. Can you tell me 5 nice things about me? Right. And then you get a whole paragraph to go to. But when you go from the advice perspective, or when you go to people that don't have your best interest at heart, you might get a perspective you don't need. And that's not helpful.
Okay. Yeah.
So you don't want the friend that's always, sugarcoats everything and isn't going to be honest and truthful, but you also don't want to go to somebody who's not going to lift you up. Bless you.
Sorry. Thank you.
So we've talked about, so you can outsource it. You can ask other people for what's going on. You can ask other people what is their perspective? Are they intentional with it? How have they crafted their own? How do they, view themselves, others, the world? You can imagine a new one, right? Where I just said, like, what would it look like in your mind, to different people? You can learn a new one. My new thing is reading essay collections. I've said this to you a lot before and you always disagree with me, but I say, after I'll read a particular essay or something like that, and a short one too, I'll be like, wow, I do not have many thoughts. I am not a critical thinker in this world.
Okay. Your perception on that
Thank you.
Through a very distorted lens. Because I think anyone who listens to this podcast would say, no.
It's like the Tracy. Same 10, but I'll take it. I'll think about that. Thank you. But so I read essays and I try and read from diverse perspectives of many different experiences, people outside the United States, people of different sexual orientation, political orientation, like look at all the protected classes, things like that. Like make sure you're not just reading perspectives that you've already been ingratiated under.
Honestly, I think it's such a great idea because as you view this wide range of perspectives, I think it helps you then turn that into yourself to try and look at yourself with maybe a different kinds of lens, a wider view of yourself as well.
Well, and then once you do that analysis of like, what is my perspective in these areas and am I happy with it and how can I mature it over time intentionally? I kind of think about what do I want it to be, or what kind of perspective have I always admired and I haven't implemented? Because recently, not super proud of this, and I'm a jokester, I'm the comedy hour when I go to events. But I recently went to my nephew's birthday party at a beach, a huge public beach, and I'm a vampire. I do not do well in the sun, so this was a new experience for me. I'd never been here before. So lots of people everywhere. We had a big group, and I'm sitting on a blanket with my sister. And across the way against a tree is a man at least my age playing a guitar with two of his buddies sitting down next to him, also leaning against the tree. And he's just playing a guitar and singing. Nobody asked him, wasn't invited, was not a scheduled paid performance. I did not sign up for this show. And I, with a whole lot of judgment in my voice, look at my sister and say, oh, men still do this at our age? And she just, with a similar perspective, looked at me and was like, right? So then about 20, 30 minutes later, my cousin comes and I make a similar comment to her, and she looks over and super bubbly, enthusiastic, interested, engaged, and goes, oh, how cool. And I was like, oh, I'm the bitch. And just like her reaction to it and her engagement in it and how she let it affect her and how that affected the people around her, I was like, I have absolutely no reason to hold on to the perspective I walked onto this beach with. That is eras of watching Daria, of growing up related to some Gen Xers, and just being really introverted. And a personal value of mine is not to being considerate to anybody else, right? And so for me, I could never show up to a public place with an instrument and start playing. This man was not bad at what he was doing, and it wasn't overpowering, wasn't overtaking it. And I decided in that moment, like, I need to be more like Brooke. Like, this is like, what a refreshing perspective to have. And I can't believe it took me to almost 40 to not be so jaded in life. I'm so judgmental. But like, that was a huge like impetus for me that, I could have had a non-thought to it, but I definitely could have had a more positive thought to it. Right. And like that, like I said, it just kind of changed the air around us. And there was just two of us.
But once again, you were open to somebody else's perspective. And then you actually took it and looked at it and went, this is a better perspective to have.
And I can apply it for more than guitar playing men on the beach, right? Like that.
Right. And I think that if we all took that and said, hey, let me be open to other people's perspectives on how they view something, and let me look at that and see, is this a better way for me to look at this thing? Take that in, or myself, take that in.
There's so much going on in the world and in our country and our state and a local level. At the very least, maybe it won't change my perspective, but it can help me understand someone else's more. If I'm able to kind of take it outside the situation, examine it, look at it, see what my reaction to it is and why, and how I can maybe respond to it more productively, or in a more controlled, logical manner, not as reactive.
Well, this has given me a lot to think about. And clearly I have homework now, which super happy about. Actually, I am happy about it. I like homework. I feel like this, I'm hoping that everyone listening to this will just take it in and maybe look at something in a different way. So obviously, if this episode spoke to you, please share it with a friend. If you have time, give us some love on your preferred platform with a rate, review, and subscribe. You can also reach out to us via Instagram and YouTube under The Brightly Podcast, or via email at brightlypodcast@gmail.com.
With that, we hope you have a bright and beautiful day.